Hello. Now, there are some subjects in Cinema 4D considered so boring that no sane person would look to tackle them in a video tutorial. No person, that is, except me, now. So, in this fairly short video, I'm going to look at something that's a very important part of my workflow, but not something that I see tackled very often in either tutorials or in the workplace. And that's the subject of how to select large numbers of objects, and more importantly, how to recall those selections at will when you want to work on things en masse. Now, there's no doubt that this is 15 minutes of your life that you'll never get back, but hopefully by the end of it, you'll also feel that it wasn't 15 minutes wasted. So if you're a bit confused what I'm going on about, let's dive into Cinema 4D and take a look. This is the very simple starting point for this tutorial. You can see here that I've got a lot of spline paths here which were brought in from Illustrator 8, and I've exploded them out and given them all a unique name. Now, the reason for doing this is where we were going to get to in a future tutorial, and I'm just going to jump over to the end of that to show you the issue. So this tutorial is about how we can use Espresso to create rather nice controllers for controlling lots and lots of different things, but in a sort of continuous spliney-like way here, so we can change the profiles of the thicknesses as they go in and out of this logo here. We can also change in one go the thicknesses of all of the sweeps, and we've got a spline controller for doing that. So that was the point of that tutorial, which is a rather neat little trick using something called an iterator. But in the process of making that, I realized that being able to select things is quite a thing. Because here, this is one of the few examples we've got of a rig where we can't use a nice simple cloner to multiply all of the elements here, because we've got so much going on in terms of changes of thicknesses, both along the sweeps here and from top to bottom in the logo. We have to create them as separate sweeps. And what that means is that we end up with a lot of these individual objects with items buried underneath their own hierarchy. So for instance, if I wanted to select all the circles which are making the profile, the cross sections here, I can't just marquee select them because I haven't got a way of doing that easily. I have to hold down the control key and click them multiple times. And you don't get far into doing a project like this and you realise that that's actually wasting a huge amount of time. So instead of bundling it all in with this, I thought that I would give it its own little separate tutorial where we can look at intelligent ways of creating retrievable selections. I know it's quite a boring subject, but because it can save you so much time, hopefully this will give you a couple of new tools in your arsenal, which will allow you to go ahead and be more creative and use your time more creatively rather than just trying to select hundreds of things time after time. So let's jump back to our tutorial in hand here, and let's see how to create these selections. So at this stage of the process, we have a precious opportunity because this is so simple. This is a moment where we actually can quite easily select lots of items at once. So I can shift select, I can marquee select this, I can hold down control and marquee select the next lot, and I've got all of my path spline selected already. Now what we want to do is make sweeps out of all of these ultimately, and with these selected, that's extremely easy to do. If we hold down the Alt key, we come up to our generators here, we're going to make a sweep. So if I let go, by holding the Alt, it actually is going to make a sweep as a parent for every single one of those paths. And what it also does is it selects those sweeps, which is quite helpful. However, we've now lost the selection of these paths. So from here on in, it's actually not easy to select all of these paths. So the first thing I would say is when you get a chance to memorize a selection in some way, when it's easy, do it, trap it, capture it straight away. So I'm just going to backtrack here and get rid of all of these sweeps. And what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the first method for making a storable selection. And that's easily done by going up to the Select menu, Selection Filter, and Create Selection Object. By doing that with all those objects selected, it's created this new type of element up here, and it's filled up this list. And this is fairly self-explanatory. It's probably the simplest way of storing a selection. You can see that we have a list here which we can add and remove by drag and dropping or deleting as we see fit. I would probably name this paths. And from here on in, if we click away from that and we carry on our duties, and then we suddenly decide that we need to get our objects back, we can just double click its icon and it will select all of those objects. Or you can just select the element and go restore selection, and then that will select them as well. So that really is a very, very powerful little tool, which I know has been highlighted before in other tutorials, and hopefully you found it and are using it. So that's great, but there are some other things that we sometimes want to do with selections, and so this is a one-trick pony. So there's a second way that we might want to create a selection, which I will demonstrate, and that's using layers. If I double-click the icon for this to get my selection back, and then I'm going to go to my Layers tab, which in my layout is here. It may be different in yours. If I right click in my window here, I can say New Layer from Object Selection. And you can see that their icons change. I've got this awful mucky brown color. I don't know why it picks the colors it does. But there you go. This tells us that all of these items are in this layer. So if I call this Paths, we've now got this as a layer. And the reason that this is helpful for getting selections back is if you right click the name of a layer and you go select from layer, you get exactly the same functionality as your selection paths. Okay, so and these layers are also good for other things. We can switch all sorts of things on and off. So I'll look at that in a second when we come to creating the sweeps. But another useful feature here, if you want to unclutter your object list and just concentrate on these path splines, is we've got this S for solo button here. And if I press that, it's going to kind of collapse the object list so that you've only got your splines here. So you can't accidentally even select the wrong thing. So that might be a useful little thing to do from time to time if you're trying to concentrate on changing the attributes of one of the elements en masse. Here, for instance, if we look at our splines here, they've got a slightly funny kink, and that's because of the interpolation that we've got on all of these here. So if I was to, oh sorry, I'm in the wrong mode. If that happens to you, we want to look at our object, so we need to go back to the object attributes. Here I've got this adaptive setting, and if I set this down, it's going to smooth out the paths here. So this is one of the many reasons for wanting to be able to effectively shift select everything, is so that you can affect all of these attributes all in one go, something that would be very difficult once these have been set up as sweeps if we haven't saved that selection. So layers are great for that, but there is also, if you want to do that, a slight issue with layers. If I just collapse this null here, which has been used for organizational purposes, and I hit my solo button again, something weird happens. What happens here is the whole thing disappears. And that's because of the way that your object list actually works. This currently is formatted in a very specific way. So anything that you can't actually currently see effectively doesn't exist in the display. So if I try to solo something which isn't displayed, it still isn't displayed. Now the way around that is that you can display as a flat tree. If I do that, then everything comes back. But when I unsolo it, we get this layout here, which is rarely what you want to see. So there's a third way of being able to isolate elements, which you can then use for selections. It's not a selection tool in itself, but that is a very underused feature called bookmarks, and that's found up here. And there are actually bookmarks in a few other places, such as the animation window as well. If I come here and I select default bookmark, you'll see miraculously we return to where we were before I selected that flat tree. And it turns out that this default bookmark is actually the current state of your object list. So if you've never used bookmarks before, what you're actually doing is using them when you navigate during the course of normal operation. You're just creating a constantly updating default bookmark. But if we wanted to isolate one of these elements, we can do that because we have this little filter pop up here. Another thing that a lot of people miss when they're learning Cinema 4D that they don't really understand exists. And here we see we've got these lists of all the different types of element in our object list. And what we can do here is we can solo them. So if I hold down the Control key and click on Spline, that is going to hide all of the elements that are in our object list except the splines. So here we have what we want. If I just switch these other ones back on again, you'll see that if I do what I did before, close up that null, hit press Control and solo splines, again, they all disappear because they're currently hidden in the current default bookmark. So again, I can get them back visibly by coming up to the view and displaying as a flat tree. But all of that is a little bit of a faff to keep doing. So what we can do is I can hide this again. If we want this state of the object list to be remembered, I can go up here and I can say add a bookmark. And then that will be added as bookmark.5 in this case. So if I select manage bookmarks, I can change this to path splines. I already have one here set up from previously. So I can't see my close button. There we go. So again, if I want to get back to where I was, I go default bookmark. But if I want to see those path splines, I just press path splines. That solos that type of object and sets the view to flat tree. And I can go back again just by hitting default bookmark. Okay, so bookmarks are a very useful tool for creating lots of different types of selection. And then of course I can just marquee select them and I can change all my attributes as I see fit. All right, so those are the 3 different selection types. And that really is all I wanted to show you today. What I can do though is just very quickly do a rough version of our setup using these elements. So let's say I made my layer of paths. I can say select from layer. Now if I hold down my Alt key and come up to my generators and let go on sweep, I get all of those sweeps created and they're selected, remember. So I can use one of my various methods. Let's say that I want to use a selection object. Let's call this sweeps. So now those selections are instantly retrievable. So again, anything that you want to do en masse to the the settings of a sweep, you can now do very quickly. So I've got all of those selected, and now I want to create the cross section that's going to finish the profile of these sweeps. And I can do that by holding the Shift key down. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to select an end side. So I've got total control over the numbers of sides. And you can see under each sweep, I got an end side. So while I've got those selected, let's make a layer out of these. So new layer from object selection. See, they've all become added to this layer with a purple icon. And so I can right click and I can say select from layer at any point in time. So if I go back to my attributes here, these are vast. So if I set them all to 1 centimeter, let's say we make 12 sides, no intersection, no interpolation. And there we go. We've got something that's starting to look like our shape already. So just to recap quickly, we have selection objects. And the good thing about these, we can instantly add and remove by dragging and dropping into the box. And those are found from the select menu selection filter, create selection object. We have layers. Now these have multiple uses. For instance, let's say that I want to make a layer out of my sweeps now. If I go new layer from object selection and I call these sweeps. One thing that you can do here is if I wanted to work on the splines underneath, rather than having to switch off all of the sweeps, I can just turn off generators for the sweeps. And it's a way of kind of showing and hiding just the sweep elements, but retaining the paths in view, so I could edit them if I wanted. And then when I'm ready to come back and look at the sweeps again, I can just switch them on. Again, I can select them all by going select from layer. And the third way that we can isolate elements is by creating a bookmark. So here we can create a bookmark of our choosing by opening up the filter menu. We can hold down the Control key and click on an eye, and that will solo that view. And if everything is hidden, because they're buried under hierarchies, which in this case they weren't, we can go to flat tree or any of the changed views that we want, and then we can add a bookmark and we can retrieve that at any time. And when we're ready to go back to our normal operation, we just go default bookmark. So there you go, that's it. Hopefully you'll feel that that was some time well spent and that it's something that you can use in the future. Don't forget that these seem very simple things to implement in your workflow, but they are things that take practice. You need to use them over and over again for them to become comfortable in your working life. So make an effort at the start, and then you'll find these things really do start to save you quite considerable amounts of time. So if you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and pop over to Twitter to say hello via @meshmashuk. So take care, and remember, there's no such thing as being lucky, so you'd better be good.